Have you ever felt this? We offer someone our time, our care, the best of what we have. Every message, every small gesture comes from a place of sincerity. And in return, silence. A message read but left unanswered. A missed call never returned. A conversation that drifts into emptiness, stretched thin by growing distance. Then we ask ourselves, did I do something wrong? Am I simply not enough? Yet there is a truth few dare to face. The one who loves you most may be the very one who ignores you. Not because they do not care, but because love, like the human heart, is complex, is conflicted, and easily wounded. In this video, we'll explore that emotional paradox, not only through the lens of psychology, but through the timeless wisdom of Stoic philosophy. More importantly, we'll seek a path to inner command, how to remain composed, overcome the sting of neglect, and stand like a mountain unmoved by passing storms. 1. Too close, too familiar. And then, taken for granted. There is a common psychological phenomenon often overlooked in close relationships. The more present we are, the easier we are to disregard. When someone is always there, consistently caring, sending morning wishes, and listening deep into the night, their presence slowly becomes a default in the other's eyes. What once moved the heart and stirred gratitude now registers merely as normal. And tragically, this new normal quietly kills the sense of appreciation that once existed. This is not a new observation. Long ago, Stoic philosophy recognized that human nature tends to forget the worth of what it constantly possesses. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that all things are impermanent, even affection, closeness, or the sacred bond between two souls. When we lose sight of this truth, we begin to treat everything as granted. Familiarity becomes a mental trap that erodes gratitude, leading to indifference, and at times, even contempt. It's much like owning something new, a phone, a watch, even a house. At first, we cherish every detail, caring for it as if it were treasure. But within weeks or months, the novelty fades, and what once delighted becomes routine. The phone becomes a tool, the watch a mute accessory, and the dream house just a shelter. So too, when someone is always there to listen, to help, or to love without condition, we begin to lose the ability to feel their worth. In romantic relationships, this unfolds subtly, quietly. The one who loves more often shows it more clearly, gives more generously, and waits more patiently. At first, this makes them feel special, but over time, if the recipient fails to preserve gratitude, what once felt rare turns into a burden, or worse, an annoyance. The lover becomes the most vulnerable, for they give much but receive a little, and must bear the coldness that slowly replaces warmth. This mindset is reinforced by a natural mechanism. When people feel absolutely secure, their effort declines. Knowing the other will stay, regardless of indifference or neglect, they begin to slacken. Replies slow down, promises fade, attention drifts. This isn't always deliberate. It stems from emotional laziness and the mistaken belief that the relationship is guaranteed. Stoicism doesn't seek to blame. It calls us to awareness. When something becomes familiar, it often means we've lived too long in unconscious repetition. And without mindful presence, we lose the ability to perceive another's true value. The danger is this: the one taken for granted will begin to feel unseen, unappreciated. Disappointment builds over time, turns into silent pain, and finally, distance. Consider a simple example. Someone who texts good morning every day as a gesture of care. At first, this touches the heart, perhaps brightens the entire day. But over time, without conscious appreciation, the words go unnoticed, sometimes unanswered. The morning greeting becomes mechanical, stripped of its meaning. One day, when the message no longer comes, rather than missing it, the recipient feels nothing. The loss occurs, but no one turns back. Stoicism reminds us, all things in life have limits, including the patience of one who always loves. When you allow someone to feel they are no longer cherished, you slowly fray the thread that binds two souls. And when indifference becomes the norm, love has no space to remain. What's most alarming is that many only realize this when it's too late, when the other has chosen to walk away, when silence becomes complete, when no one asks about your tired mornings or stays up for your restless nights. It's then that what was once taken lightly becomes the source of the deepest pain. Yet from that pain, we learn profound lessons about impermanence, about the value of seemingly small things, and about our duty to nurture gratitude in love. No love lasts without gratitude. Closeness does not ensure connection unless matched by the effort to keep feeling alive. Stoicism does not ask us to create distance to be valued. It asks us to live with awareness in every act, so that even in the closest intimacy, we never lose the reverence we hold for one another. 2. Not everyone loves the way you wish. In relationships, especially in love, one of the greatest sources of disappointment lies in expecting others to love us the way we want to be loved. This is not an act of selfishness, but a natural human response. We often judge others based on our own emotional frameworks. The trouble begins when two people express love in entirely different ways, and that difference is mistaken for a lack of care. Each person is shaped by a different environment, influenced by family, culture, and past wounds. Some grow up in families where affection is expressed through tender words, physical closeness, or constant presence. Others are taught that love means quiet sacrifice, actions over words, and silent presence rather than daily I love yous. So, when two people speak different emotional languages, misunderstanding arises quickly. One may feel abandoned, while the other believes they are loving in the best way they know how. For example, someone who often checks in with messages and yearns for words of affection may feel hurt when their partner replies briefly or slowly. Meanwhile, the partner shows love by being dependable, working hard for stability, but doesn't know how to verbalize it. This mismatch in emotional expression is not a lack of love, but a difference in how it's conveyed. The issue only becomes real when neither person recognizes this gap. Then blame begins to circulate. If they loved me, they would text more. Or, if they really cared, they'd be here when I need them. In truth, love may still exist, just not in the form we expect. Stoicism emphasizes understanding human nature. Every person is a blend of history, beliefs, and habits. We cannot impose one universal standard of affection onto everyone. When we do, we stop seeing the other as a distinct being and instead reduce them to a projection of our desires. This creates the feeling of being unloved, not because they don't care, but because they don't love in the way we wish. From a psychological angle, the idea of love languages helps clarify this. Some express love through affirming words, others through quality time, helpful acts, gifts, or physical touch. When two people's languages don't align, misinterpretation is inevitable. One may feel unloved, even as the other continues to love deeply in their own way. This becomes even more challenging during sensitive periods, conflict, stress, or emotional struggle. In those moments, the gap in emotional style becomes a serious barrier. Someone needing verbal comfort may feel crushed by silence. Someone unaccustomed to expressing feelings may feel overwhelmed by the demand to speak, while their mind remains clouded. It's also crucial to recognize that some people were never taught how to express love in healthy ways. For them, love is not something easily spoken. Sometimes they love by enduring in silence, by always being there when needed, without uttering a word. Without enough patience to notice, we may mistake that silence for indifference. And in many cases, it's precisely the fixed expectation of how love should appear that leads to collapse. Rather than asking, "Why can't they love me the way I need?" it's more helpful to ask, "How are they trying to love me in ways I haven't yet seen?" In doing so, we shift from demanding to observing, from judgment to understanding. This is also how Stoicism teaches us to approach relationships with reason, not emotional impulse. Love does not have a fixed shape. It need not be loud, constant, or sweet at all times. Some love is shown through action, others through silence. That difference does not make love any less real. It only becomes a problem when we fail to recognize it. Accepting that not everyone loves the way you wish is the first step toward freeing yourself from needless disappointment. It opens the door to conversation, to finding common ground between two emotional worlds. Most importantly, it releases you from the heavy grip of judgment and invites a deeper, more realistic, and compassionate way of seeing what is truly unfolding. 3. Silence is an emotional test, not a rejection. In intimate relationships, silence is often interpreted as a sign of indifference, coldness, or rejection. When someone stops responding to messages, no longer initiates conversation, or shows less concern than before, the other party easily falls into anxiety, doubt, and pain. Yet silence does not always carry negative meaning. At times, it is not the end, but a test to measure our inner steadiness, our emotional dependence, and our ability to govern our reactions. In Stoic philosophy, our response is the only thing we truly control. What others do, be it silence, distance, or detachment, lies beyond our reach. But how we respond to those things is entirely up to us. When someone becomes silent, the first Stoic lesson is not to hastily label it as rejection. Instead, we pause, observe, and reflect. Silence can arise from many causes. Sometimes the other person needs time to reflect, to realign emotionally, or simply to recover from stress. They may also be waiting to see whether you can stay composed, or whether you will panic, lash out, or act impulsively. In such moments, your response is not only a reflection of your inner world, but a message to them that you can endure uncertainty without losing balance. A key tenet of Stoicism is the ability to separate emotion from subjective judgment. When the other person doesn't reply for hours or even days, the mind tends to fabricate negative scenarios. They don't love me anymore. What did I do wrong? They must be trying to leave. These stories don't come from truth, but from the fear of rejection, a psychological defense mechanism. Yet from a place of composure, silence need not be feared. It creates space for self-examination. It forces us to confront emotional dependencies we might not have recognized. When we grow restless and anxious over someone else's silence, it reveals how much power we've given them to dictate our emotions and our internal state. Silence also tests self-respect. A person with inner solidity won't allow silence to injure their self-worth. They don't speculate, fabricate stories, or desperately seek validation. They understand that emotions are transient and that a lull in communication does not always signal an ending. In contrast, someone emotionally dependent will feel abandoned, panic, and try to fill the void, often through repeated messages, excessive calls, or pressing questions. It is precisely when we are left alone with our thoughts that our capacity for self-control becomes most visible. Stoicism doesn't just teach us how to endure hardship. It teaches us how to face uncertainty without sacrificing our inner value. When we accept silence as a natural part of a relationship rather than resisting it, we are cultivating a special kind of inner strength, resilience in the face of what we cannot control. Another reason silence serves as a true test is its duration. In that span, the person being met with silence must confront fundamental questions. What am I expecting? Is my worth really dependent on another's response? Am I reacting from emotion or understanding? These questions reshape our mindset, restore our autonomy, and clarify our boundaries. At the same time, silence reveals who truly holds the reins in the relationship. If someone uses silence as a means of control, your response will determine their success. Maintaining calm, avoiding impulsive contact, and refusing to chase in desperation dismantles their power. When someone sees that silence doesn't shake you, they're forced to reconsider their behavior. Ultimately, silence is also an opportunity to reassess both yourself and the relationship. Instead of focusing solely on the pain of being ignored, use the time to ask, where is this relationship headed? Do I truly feel respected? Is this silence temporary or a sign of growing distance? These questions lead us to decisions not rooted in fleeting emotion, but in conscious awareness and clarity. Thus, in Stoicism, silence ceases to be a threat. It becomes a necessary pause to test our stability, clarify our values, and most importantly, to train the art of responding with reason rather than being swept away by emotion. 4. The fear of being hurt builds emotional walls. In every relationship, be it love, friendship, or family, opening up always carries risk. The risk of rejection, misunderstanding, or worse, being taken advantage of. That's why many choose to build emotional walls to shield themselves from potential harm. This is not a sign of indifference or coldness, but a natural human response shaped by the memory of past wounds. Psychology refers to this as emotional defense, a subconscious mechanism that protects individuals from reliving past pain. When someone has been betrayed, mocked for their vulnerability, or abandoned while opening up, they tend to withdraw and maintain distance in future relationships. This hesitation doesn't reflect how much they care for the other person. It reflects how deeply they have been hurt and left unhealed. Stoic philosophy regards emotional pain as an inevitable part of the human condition. No one lives without being wounded at some point, yet how each person processes those wounds varies greatly. Some confront them, learn to accept, and move through. Others bury emotion, avoid closeness, and construct an outward image of strength to conceal inner fragility. When someone loves you yet acts distant, it doesn't necessarily mean they don't care. On the contrary, it may be because they care so much that showing their true feelings feels dangerous. People with strong emotional defenses tend to avoid deep conversations, share little about themselves, and retreat when they feel seen too clearly. They react strongly to situations that threaten emotional control, which can be mistaken for apathy or emotional detachment. In truth, the fear of being hurt doesn't just shape how someone loves, it can determine whether they dare to love at all. Often, what you offer may feel overwhelming, not because they don't want it, but because they don't believe they deserve it, or fear you'll leave once you see the vulnerable parts they try to hide. That fear makes them pull back, establishing boundaries to maintain a temporary sense of safety. In today's world, where emotional expression is often seen as weakness, many are taught to manage emotions rather than accept them. They learn to suppress tears, stifle anger, and hide disappointment until they forget how to open their hearts authentically. When met with genuine affection, they don't know how to respond. For them, love itself feels risky. Every spark of emotion carries the shadow of potential pain. From a Stoic lens, emotional walls are not a flaw, but a natural outcome of trying to survive in a volatile world. However, if left unexamined, these walls become emotional prisons that prevent true connection. To love someone, one must be willing to risk. Yet fear of pain leads many to choose emotional safety over honest connection. And because of this, in relationships, the one who loves deeply is not always the one who expresses it most clearly. The quiet observer, the one who sometimes pulls away, or the one who doesn't follow the usual rules of love, may in fact be loving deeply. They just don't know how to show it naturally. What they need is not interrogation, but patience. Understanding that silence or distance doesn't always equal indifference is a crucial step in remaining composed and avoiding impulsive emotional reactions. Instead of rushing to judgment, recognizing that they are protecting themselves opens a path toward empathy and, at times, silent healing. It's important to remember that those who build walls don't always wish to isolate themselves. They are seeking safety in a world where emotional wounds are easily dismissed. The walls they construct aren't meant to shut others out, but to guard against pain not yet healed. Acknowledging and respecting this is often the first step toward genuine connection, where no one needs to pretend to be strong, and everyone is free to be fully themselves. 5. Some love you for who you are. Others love you for what you bring. In the realm of human relationships, love does not exist in a single form. Some love arises from soulful alignment, from a deep connection between two beings, and some love stems from need, from benefit, or from what one person can offer the other. This doesn't make the love false, but it does present a truth we must confront. Not everyone who loves you truly loves you for who you are. One of the common paradoxes in relationships is the belief that being loved means being fully accepted. In reality, many relationships are built on conditions. You are loved because you are beautiful, competent, attentive, sacrificial, or simply because you make someone feel special. Such love may feel intense in the moment, but it is rarely lasting when those benefits shift or disappear. Social psychology refers to this as instrumental love, a form of affection based on value exchange. A person is loved because they fulfill a certain desire in the other. Care, financial support, social standing, emotional comfort, or even the feeling of being needed. When those elements fade, the affection often follows, not because the person has changed, but because the reason they were loved no longer exists. Stoicism does not deny the existence of conditional love. Instead, it offers a sober reminder. Distinguish between being loved for who you are and being loved for what you provide. This isn't a cynical view, but a clear-eyed observation of relational nature. When one realizes that the love they receive is based on external value, they can adjust expectations and shield themselves from unnecessary disappointment. In conditional relationships, people tend to sustain their best version to keep affection alive. They strive to avoid mistakes, to remain agreeable, accommodating, sometimes even suppressing personal needs just to preserve the other's fondness. But this creates immense internal pressure. No one can endlessly perform as an ideal without fatigue. Over time, such dynamics grow imbalanced. One gives, the other takes. One fears rejection if they cease to be perfect. The other grows accustomed to expecting. When this asymmetry persists, cracks form, exhaustion, a sense of being used, and lack of sincerity begin to replace the positive emotions that once held the bond. Another important point: love based on benefit is not always intentional exploitation. Often, neither party fully recognizes that the relationship rests on conditions. For example, someone may feel they love deeply because the other is always present and helpful. But when that help stops, so does the feeling. This reveals that the affection was tied more to usefulness than to the person themselves. From a Stoic perspective, what matters is the ability to recognize the true nature of a relationship without allowing emotion to obscure reason. Clarity allows us to discern between real love, where one is cherished as a whole being, flaws and all, and love that only exists so long as one fulfills a specific role or function in another's life. A clear sign of conditional love is when someone withdraws, detaches, or loses interest the moment you no longer offer something of value to them. They may no longer listen when you're vulnerable or stand by you during hardship. Such relationships rarely endure trials because the bond is rooted not in genuine attachment, but in external variables easily lost. The fact that some love for benefit is not a condemnation, but a caution. It reminds us to be discerning with our trust, understanding that not all love stems from deep appreciation, allows us to feel less broken when affection fades, and more empowered to choose relationships built on firmer ground. Stoicism doesn't teach us to avoid love, but to uphold our self-worth within any relationship. 6. The more you chase, the further they drift. In relationships, there is a common phenomenon many experience, but few fully understand. The more you try to hold on, the more the other person pulls away. A relationship is like a string on an instrument. Stretch it too tight, and it breaks. Leave it too loose, and it produces no sound. The balance between giving and receiving, between pursuing and letting go, between closeness and freedom, is essential for sustaining a lasting connection. From a psychological standpoint, the tendency to retreat when pursued too much is known as the avoidance response. When someone feels pressured by expectations, clinginess, or control, they instinctively create distance to protect their personal space. The more suffocated they feel, the more they seek escape. And here lies the paradox. The more one tries to preserve a relationship, the faster the other retreats. This often stems from insecurity. When sensing the other pulling away, one side attempts to compensate by texting more, seeking reassurance, or closely tracking things like online activity or response time. These actions are not malicious. They are driven by a need for emotional certainty. Yet when repeated, they begin to feel like control to the other person. Distance then becomes inevitable. Stoicism views relationships through the lens of self-mastery and personal boundaries. Trying to control what lies beyond our reach, others' emotions, behaviors, or choices, is a waste of vital energy. When someone feels compelled to respond, affection that might have grown naturally is distorted. This not only burdens the other, but leaves the one pursuing emotionally depleted and wounded when their efforts go unanswered. The chase and retreat pattern occurs not only in romantic relationships, but also in friendships, family, and work dynamics. When one party is always the initiator, always accommodating, always giving in, they are placed in a lower emotional position. This creates an imbalance of power. One becomes dominant, the other compliant. The relationship turns from mutual connection into emotional labor. Another key point is how predictability diminishes emotional value. When you're always available, always waiting, always responsive, you unknowingly reduce your perceived worth. What comes easily is rarely cherished. It's not that the other person means to take you for granted, but human psychology tends to equate value with scarcity and autonomy. On the other hand, those who maintain composure, who don't chase emotional impulses or get swept up by insecurity, radiate a different kind of presence. The ability to remain steady and non-reactive when faced with coldness reveals deep inner stability. That very calmness often compels the other to pause and reconsider your place in their life. Stoicism honors equanimity, a state undisturbed by others' behavior. When you stop chasing, you do not lose love, you restore balance. This is not apathy or detachment, but the act of redrawing boundaries so that love grows from mutual respect and voluntary connection. Letting go does not mean giving up. In Stoic thought, to let go is to cease forcing and to preserve personal dignity. When you no longer seek external validation, you are no longer hostage to others' actions to determine your worth. And paradoxically, this makes you more attractive, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you are truly grounded, even in the absence of feedback. Every relationship has its own rhythm. Forcing progress or clinging too tightly invites resistance. Genuine connection must evolve naturally, not manipulated, not driven by ownership or control. The tighter you cling, the more suffocating the bond becomes. But when you step back with composure, the space you create may be exactly what allows the other to recognize your value. The feeling of being left behind often drives people to panic. Yet Stoic philosophy encourages us to rise above the moment, to stop being victims of fleeting emotions and instead become the architects of our response and perspective. When you pause, clarity returns. Is the other truly losing interest or simply seeking space to find balance? That answer only comes when you are still enough, steady enough, and wise enough to observe rather than react. 7. Love does not require constant reassurance. In romantic relationships, The desire to hear that we are loved, valued, and seen as special is entirely natural. However, when this need becomes constant and intense, it may reveal an inner imbalance where love becomes tightly bound to external validation. In truth, a healthy relationship does not require continual affirmation. Trust, stability, and genuine connection do not depend on the frequency of sweet words, but on the depth of presence. A common misconception about love is the belief that if someone loves you, they must constantly express it through repeated words and actions. This leads many to feel anxious if they don't receive daily messages, regular praise, or notice even slight changes in emotional tone. Under this mindset, love turns into a series of tests where each silence feels like distance and each delayed response is interpreted as indifference. From a psychological perspective, this behavior often stems from latent insecurity. Those with unstable self-esteem or a history of unhealthy relationships tend to seek constant reassurance from others. They feel safe when told they are loved, but when that reassurance isn't consistent, they immediately fall into doubt and worry. This creates a cycle of instability. The more affirmation feels lacking, the more they demand it, placing pressure on the other person in the relationship. Stoic philosophy views love through the lens of self-control and awareness. True love should not unseat one's internal balance, but should exist alongside emotional stability. If a relationship requires one person to constantly express affection just to soothe the other, it soon becomes a burden rather than a joy. The one being asked to continually reassure feels drained, while the one needing it feels perpetually lacking, even when care is present. Love does not require endless affirmation because its essence does not lie in appearances, but in the safety cultivated over time. When two people are truly connected, they don't need to check the status of their relationship daily. They don't require constant proof to sustain trust because presence, attentive listening, and consistency in behavior are enough. Mature love does not rely on verbal chains, but on the shared sense that both are still walking the same path, even when few words are spoken. The persistent need for affirmation often points to a deeper issue: the conflation of self-worth with being loved. When someone believes they are only worthy if loved by another, they live in fear of losing that love, constantly testing, probing, and demanding confirmation. In contrast, a person grounded in their own worth understands that their value remains regardless of outside validation. This inner calm allows them to love from a place of abundance, not need. In reality, some people do not often say, "I love you," nor are they skilled at expressing feelings through words. But this doesn't mean they love less. They may show love through quiet presence, consistent acts of service, or small, unsaid gestures repeated faithfully. If love is measured only by words, we risk missing the quiet but enduring things that build true trust in a lasting relationship. Stoicism encourages us to train our awareness so that we're not carried away by fleeting insecurity. When your partner doesn't text for a day or doesn't say, "I love you" often, it does not mean the love has faded. Emotions must be clearly distinguished from reality. Learning to observe the self, to ask whether one is reacting from fear or a need for validation, helps adjust expectations and maintain steadiness within the relationship. Love does not need constant reassurance, because when it is deep, genuine, and mature, it speaks for itself. through consistent actions, enduring presence, and a sense of responsibility. Silence does not mean the love is gone. The absence of daily expression does not mean the feelings have cooled. Rather than seeking constant validation, what matters more is attending to the quiet current beneath, the place where trust, peace, and mutual respect form the true foundation. 8. They may be at war with themselves. When someone begins to grow silent, withdraw from intimacy, or become emotionally elusive in a relationship, the typical reaction is worry, disappointment, and a search for external explanations. Do they no longer love me? What did I do wrong? Is there someone else? These questions circle around the fear of rejection. Yet one explanation is often overlooked, though it may be the most common. They are battling themselves. This battle is not one waged outwardly, but an internal struggle unfolding in silence. It may be a conflict between emotion and reason, between unresolved past and unstable present. Some enter relationships still carrying wounds that haven't healed. They may have been betrayed, made to feel inadequate, or lost trust in others. And even though they wish to love and connect, old fears linger like shadows that keep them from moving forward. From a psychological perspective, this reflects subconscious defense mechanisms. Those who've faced past trauma tend to develop an emotional immune system, one that severs connection when they sense possible harm. This isn't a measure of how much they care, but a reflex to guard a fractured interior. Their withdrawal is not intended to wound others, but to prevent further injury to themselves. Stoicism does not treat emotion as the enemy, but calls us to distinguish what is within our control from what is not. When someone pulls away, the first recognition must be that their actions may have nothing to do with you. Their silence might be the outcome of a complex inner dialogue, one you cannot join and should not try to control. In many cases, the person may not know how to share the struggle they are facing within. They might feel ashamed to admit their fragility, fear being judged, or simply lack the language to explain the chaos in their mind. Instead of opening up, they go quiet. Instead of explaining, they create distance. It is the only method they know to navigate the disorder within, even if it unknowingly causes harm. Some people are torn by their own emotions. They love, but fear loss. They seek connection, yet doubt their capacity to sustain it. They crave stability, but unhealed pasts lead them to question everything good that comes. These inner conflicts are not easily expressed and certainly not quickly resolved. So when they step back, it may not be rejection. It may be an effort to understand themselves. Stoic philosophy teaches us to observe reality without rushing into reaction. When someone withdraws, rather than chasing, interrogating, or trying to regain control, it is wiser to remain internally steady. This not only protects you from needless pain, but also gives the other person room to face their own battle in a space free from pressure, a space where they are not forced to explain before they're ready. In reality, some internal battles are so silent that even the person fighting them cannot name them. They only know they feel tired, disengaged, unable to sustain connection, not because of anything you did. They may be grappling with disorientation, loss of purpose, or wounds without answers. And in retreating, in pausing the connection, they are simply trying to hold themselves together. Recognizing that someone may be at war with themselves is a vital step in dissolving negative assumptions. Instead of interpreting their silence as a reflection of your worth, you come to see it as a reminder. Every person has an inner world, private, complex, and layered. No one can consistently offer love to others while struggling to offer it to themselves. Their lack of communication does not mean they don't want to share. Maybe they're not ready. Maybe they fear that if they reveal their pain, you'll leave. Maybe they believe their suffering is a burden you shouldn't have to carry. Those who are fighting themselves often choose silence, not because they don't trust you, but because they haven't learned to trust themselves. From a Stoic view, your task is not to force entry into another's inner world, but to keep the light within your own steady. When you remain calm, respect their space, and do not let emotional reactivity steer your actions, you show them that your affection is not a demand, but a safe place they can return to when they're ready. 9. Avoiding conflict is a dangerous sign. Every relationship, no matter how close, is bound to encounter conflict. Differences in thought, emotion, needs, or values are inevitable between two people. Therefore, conflict itself is not the problem. What truly matters is how one responds to it, especially when they choose avoidance over confrontation. Avoidance can take many forms: prolonged silence after an argument, changing the subject when questioned, refusing to discuss sensitive matters, or even temporarily disappearing to escape discomfort. While many see this as calming the situation or keeping the peace, in reality, the refusal to resolve conflict is one of the clearest indicators that a relationship is losing its sense of safety and long-term viability. From a psychological perspective, avoidance often reflects one of two internal states. Either the person doesn't feel safe enough to express their true emotions, or they no longer care enough to resolve the issue. Both are warnings. When someone doesn't feel able to share their thoughts, pain, or anger honestly, it signals a breakdown in trust. On the other hand, if they dismiss it as not worth discussing, it may reveal emotional withdrawal. In truth, many relationships don't end because of one major conflict, but because of many small ones that were never addressed. Emotional abrasions, though seemingly minor, accumulate over time and quietly erode connection. When one person keeps it all inside, while the other doesn't notice anything wrong, the gap between them widens. Eventually, both realize they're no longer truly communicating, just maintaining the form of a relationship that's lost its vitality. Stoicism does not reject the existence of emotion, but it teaches us to meet emotion with reason. When conflict arises, the answer is not avoidance, but calm engagement grounded in clarity. Avoidance doesn't eliminate conflict. It only buries it deeper, where it festers and causes long-term damage. Dialogue, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only way to clarify misunderstandings, realign expectations, and rebuild trust. One of the most dangerous signs in a relationship is when one side stops trying to explain or listen. Silence no longer serves as a temporary space for reflection, but becomes a default strategy for avoiding discomfort. At that point, every unresolved conflict isn't just a crack, it's a brick in the wall, separating two hearts. And over time, that wall becomes too thick to tear down. Avoiding conflict also weakens the sense of being heard and understood, two of the most vital elements in any meaningful connection. When someone shares their pain and is ignored, or when they feel their concerns aren't worth discussing, they begin to withdraw. not because they no longer love, but because they no longer feel seen as a whole person within the relationship. This also stunts mutual growth. Every conflict, if handled with care, is an opportunity to understand each other better, to recalibrate expectations, and to improve communication. But when conflict is consistently avoided, the relationship loses its chance to mature. It stalls, or worse, regresses over time. Stoicism urges us to distinguish between emotional reaction and deliberate action. Avoidance may be a reflex to shield oneself from discomfort, but it is not a solution. A Stoic will ask, am I avoiding because I fear, or because I truly no longer care? What is keeping me from speaking honestly? Is my silence causing harm to the other person? Prolonged avoidance leaves one side feeling abandoned, while the other grows more detached from the real relationship. At that point, neither is walking together. They are merely coexisting in a fragile bond, vulnerable to collapse at the slightest blow. This is why unresolved conflict is not only a sign of instability, it is often a quiet forecast of the end, unless it is recognized and addressed in time. 10. The greatest love is the love you give yourself. In romantic relationships, love is often defined through giving, sacrifice, and the ability to fully accept another person. Yet, an equally important and often overlooked element is the love one has for oneself. This is not selfishness nor detachment. Self-love is the foundation from which one enters relationships whole, unattached, and without losing oneself. From a psychological perspective, self-respect and self-acceptance are central to forming and sustaining healthy relationships. When someone lacks a solid sense of self-worth, they tend to seek external validation. They love with the hope of being filled, affirmed, and rescued from their internal sense of lack. The relationship then becomes a tool for self-definition rather than a partnership between two whole individuals. A lack of self-love leaves a person emotionally dependent. They become vulnerable to shifts in others' behavior, feel lost when no longer the center of attention, and often measure their worth by whether or not they are loved or accepted. This creates fertile ground for deep wounds because no one, not even the most loving partner, can fill the emptiness one has built within. Stoicism emphasizes the power of inner autonomy, and one of its clearest expressions is the ability to love oneself with conscious awareness. Self-love is not about ego, but about understanding one's worth, tending to one's inner life, and not outsourcing happiness to anyone else. When a person loves themselves, they no longer fear abandonment, because they have never abandoned themselves to begin with. Someone with a healthy love for themselves will set clear boundaries in a relationship. They know the difference between giving out of genuine care and giving at the cost of self-harm. They do not accept disrespect. They do not contort themselves to fit others' expectations, and they do not sacrifice self-respect to preserve something that is breaking. This doesn't mean they are cold or unloving. It means they understand that real love does not require self-erasure. Self-love is also the ground on which one heals after heartbreak. When a relationship ends, someone who loves themselves may feel pain, but they do not collapse. They don't rush to blame the other person, nor do they brand themselves unworthy. Instead, they see the past as an experience, perhaps sorrowful, perhaps filled with loss, but never something that undermines their belief in themselves. They return to tending their inner life, to healing, and to continuing forward. Stoic philosophy teaches that happiness does not arise from outer circumstances, but from the quality of our inner thoughts. When someone practices deep self-love, they learn not to be swept away by unstable emotions triggered by others. A message left unseen, a missed call, or a cold reply does not unravel their life. They understand that their worth remains, regardless of who comes or goes. Moreover, self-love strengthens the ability to love others maturely. When someone knows how to care for themselves and fulfill their own emotional needs, they do not love to be filled, they love to share. In such a relationship, love is not a negotiation of needs, but a meeting of two independent, complete, and mutually respectful inner worlds. Neither seeks possession. Both create space for the other to be fully themselves. Conversely, without self-love, people tend to enter relationships marked by possession or dependency. They love from a place of fear of loss, of inadequacy, and they often betray their own values just to hold on to someone. This harms not only themselves, but also places pressure on the other person, who now carries the burden of someone else's happiness. In the end, self-love is the only form of love that persists through every stage of life. People come and go, circumstances change, but if you remain connected to yourself, listening, understanding, and caring for your inner life, you will always have a place to return to. This love asks for nothing, fears no rejection, and depends on no one else to exist. When I first approached Stoicism, the first thing I realized was this: we cannot control the emotions of others, but we can master our response to them. In relationships, especially when I feel ignored or unreciprocated, instead of panicking or assigning blame, I've learned to step back and observe myself. The question I always ask is, am I reacting from self-respect or from the fear of abandonment? I used to be the one who texted more than necessary, always trying to prove my worth in someone else's eyes. But the more I tried, the more I realized I was losing myself. From then on, I began to practice staying with the silence without collapsing, seeing indifference as an invitation to return to inner care. Whenever I felt hurt by being overlooked, I no longer reacted impulsively. Instead, I took solitary walks, wrote down my feelings, or simply sat in stillness and breathed deeply. I didn't do this to become more attractive in someone else's eyes, but because I understood true value lies in not abandoning yourself, no matter who walks away. We do not need someone else to prove that we are worthy. The fact that we still exist, still love, and still feel pain is already proof enough. If you found value in this video, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss future content. And always remember, the one who never ignores you is the person you're striving to become each day. See you in the next video.